How many secrets can a single sheet of paper hold? During the Second World War, the answer was often the difference between life and death. We think of the war in terms of armies and machines, of grand strategies and epic battles. But there was another war, a quieter war. It was fought in basements and backrooms, in laboratories and lonely apartments. It was a war of whispers, of forged identities, and of hidden ink. The archives are full of paper. Millions upon millions of documents declassified over decades. Most are mundane. Purchase orders, troop transfer requests, supply logs, but some of them read like scripts from a spy film. They are the artifacts of this secret war. A simple laundry list could be a coded message detailing a planned act of sabotage. A love letter could contain the precise location of an enemy artillery battery. A child's drawing might hide the schematics for a new weapon. This was the war of steganography, the ancient art of hiding messages in plain sight. It was a world where lemon juice, milk, and even human body fluids became tools of espionage. It was a time when scientists in secret labs like Station 9 in Britain or the R&D branch of the American OSS worked tirelessly to create inks that were truly invisible, detectable only by a specific, obscure chemical reaction. They developed technologies that could shrink a full page of text down to the size of a period at the end of a sentence. What follows are stories inspired by 20 of these documents. They are glimpses into a conflict fought with ingenuity and nerve, where the pen was often mightier and certainly more subtle than the sword. How did a recipe for mushroom soup help a resistance cell? What deadly secret was hidden in a packet of aspirin? And what happens when the message, the one that could change everything, is lost forever? The paper remembers. Number 20, what was written in a lover's last letter? The document itself is unremarkable. It's a single sheet of thin, crinkled paper, the kind that was common in occupied Europe. The handwriting is neat, feminine. It's a letter from a woman named Annalise to her supposed lover, Pierre, in London. It speaks of longing, of memories of strolls along the Seine, of the daily struggles of finding food. It is a letter that any censor in the German-controlled postal system would have read and passed without a second thought. It's personal, sentimental, and contains no information of military value. But the real letter is not in the visible ink. The real letter is between the lines, written in a clear, odorless liquid. Back in a quiet office in London, a woman in a lab coat, perhaps one of the meticulous staff working for Vera Atkins of the Special Operations Executive SOE, would have received this letter. She would not have read the words of Annalise. Instead, she would have carefully applied a chemical developer. Maybe it was a gentle heat source or exposure to iodine vapor. As the developer worked, faint, brownish words would have bloomed into existence in the blank spaces. This hidden text was not about love. It was about death. It detailed the schedule of a specific railway line, the one used to transport heavy armor from a factory to the front. It listed the times the train passed a certain bend in the track, the number of guards, the composition of the train. This was the work of an F-section agent, one of the many women the SOE sent into France. Her cover as a quiet seamstress or a lonely wife was perfect. Her access to local gossip and her ability to observe without suspicion were her greatest weapons. The science behind this was a constant cat-and-mouse game. Early, invisible inks like lemon juice or milk were organic acids. They worked by slightly scorching the paper when heated, making the writing visible. But the enemy quickly learned to check for these by ironing all suspicious mail, so the Allied scientists had to do better. They created sophisticated chemical compounds. According to the book Shadows in the Fog by an SOE historian, these new inks required specific multi-step development processes. One ink might only appear when exposed first to ammonia fumes and then to a specific chemical spray. Using the wrong developer would do nothing. This meant even if a letter was intercepted and tested, the secret message would likely remain hidden unless the enemy knew the exact formula. The letter from Annalise was a triumph of this system. The information she provided allowed for a perfectly timed air raid by the RAF. The train was destroyed, delaying the arrival of critical armor at a key battle. Annalise, a woman who never fired a gun, had struck a major blow against the German war machine. Her weapon was observation. Her ammunition was ink. The document in the archive is a testament to her courage. It is both a love letter and a death warrant, a piece of paper that smells of perfume and high explosives. But what questions linger in the crinkles of that old paper? How many agents were caught because their ink was not as advanced as they believed? What was the psychological toll on a person who had to write letters of feigned affection while living in constant fear of the knock on the door? and how many similar letters containing equally vital intelligence were simply lost in the mail, their invisible secrets never revealed. Number 19, why was a recipe for mushroom soup a military secret? In a dusty file in the U.S. National Archives, there is a document that looks like it was torn from a cookbook. It's a recipe for cream of mushroom soup. The ingredients are simple mushrooms, cream, flour, butter, onions, salt, and pepper. The instructions are straightforward. Sauté the onions, cook the mushrooms, make a roux, add the cream. It's a perfectly normal, comforting recipe, except it wasn't. This recipe was a document created by the Research and Development Branch of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. The head of the OSS, William Wild Bill Donovan, famously told President Roosevelt that he needed his people to be glorious amateurs, who could think outside the conventional rules of warfare. This recipe was a product of that thinking. It was a coded message system designed for an agent or a resistance group operating behind enemy lines. The system was a form of open code. The message wasn't hidden in invisible ink, it was hidden in the quantities of the ingredients. The key to the code was a pre-agreed upon system. For example, the number of mushrooms might correspond to a specific unit designation. 8 mushrooms could mean the 8th Infantry Division. The amount of flour in tablespoons could indicate the unit's strength. 2 tablespoons of flour could mean 2,000 soldiers. The cooking time in minutes might refer to a date. Simmer for 20 minutes could mean the 20th of the month. An agent living in an occupied city could transmit this recipe through an open channel, like a letter to a relative in a neutral country. The letter would be read by censors who would see nothing but a harmless recipe being shared, but at its destination, the recipient would ignore the cooking instructions and instead consult their code book. They would translate the ingredients list into a full intelligence report. 8th Infantry Division, 2,000 strong, moving east on the 20th of the month. Morale is low. The low morale part might be coded into the type of spice used. Salt for good, pepper for bad. This method was brilliant because of its simplicity. It required no special chemicals or equipment, only a shared secret. As described in books like The Irregulars by Janet Conant, which details the secret work of the OSS, these clever systems were developed by a motley crew of academics, artists, and scientists who were suddenly thrust into the world of espionage. They understood that the best way to hide something was to make it so ordinary that no one would look twice. Who would suspect a recipe for soup? This specific document, the one in the archive, was likely a template or a training manual. It would have been used to teach agents how to use this system before they were parachuted into enemy territory. It was a tool of war disguised as a piece of domestic comfort. Every ingredient, every measurement had a double meaning. The entire document was a lie, hiding a deadly truth in plain sight. Yet, its existence raises unsettling questions. How many of these open codes were broken? What would happen if an agent, under duress, accidentally wrote 12 mushrooms instead of 10, sending a completely wrong piece of intelligence that could lead to a military disaster? Was an agent ever caught because the enemy, by sheer luck, had a copy of the same codebook? And did anyone ever actually try to make the soup? Number 18. What did a child's drawing really depict? The drawing is crude, done with wax crayons on cheap paper. It shows a house, a lopsided sun in the corner, and a few stick figures. A plume of smoke comes from the chimney. There are trees that look more like green lollipops. It is the kind of drawing any parent might stick on the refrigerator. It is innocent, it is artless, and it is a complete fabrication. This document, a replica of which is described in training materials for both British SOE and American OSS agents, was a sophisticated intelligence-gathering tool. The drawing was not made by a child. It was made by a resistance fighter or an allied agent. It was a map. The house wasn't a housey, it was a factory. The smoke coming from the chimney wasn't from a cozy fire, it was an indication of the factory's operational status. The number of windows on the house corresponded to the number of machine gun nests guarding the perimeter. This was a method of steganography that relied on shared visual language. An agent couldn't risk carrying a detailed, hand-drawn map of a sensitive enemy installation. If captured, such a document would be an instant death sentence, but a child's drawing? That was easily explained away. It could be a drawing from a niece or nephew, carried for sentimental reasons. The codes were simple but effective. The number of petals on a flower might indicate the number of anti-aircraft guns. The placement of the stick figures could show the location of sentry patrols. The color of the roof might indicate what was being produced inside: red for munitions, gray for vehicle parts, brown for uniforms. The entire drawing was a data-rich schematic, incomprehensible to the uninitiated, but crystal clear to the intelligence analyst waiting for it back in London or Washington. Historian and author Patrick K. O'Donnell has written extensively about the OSS Jedburgh teams who were dropped into France to work with the resistance. These teams relied heavily on locally gathered intelligence. A French farmer who worked near a factory could not write a report, but he could sketch a child's drawing of his workplace and pass it to a contact. This information was vital for planning sabotage missions or bombing raids. The goal was precision. The Allies didn't want to waste bombs on empty buildings or hit civilian areas. They needed to know the exact location of the most critical part of the factory. The drawing provided that. The document is a reminder that in the secret war, anything could be a weapon. Artlessness was a form of camouflage. The agent who drew this had to suppress any artistic skill and adopt the clumsy, innocent style of a child. They had to think in two layers: the surface image and the hidden data. The sun, the trees, the house, they were just the cover story for a grid of coordinates, numbers, and tactical symbols. But this raises some chilling questions. How many agents were betrayed because their drawing was just a little too neat, a little too precise, raising the suspicion of a sharp-eyed security officer? Did a resistance cell ever use a real child's drawing, adding their own coded marks to it, placing a child in unknowing danger? And what happened if the key was lost, if the analyst back home forgot whether the trees represented radio towers or barracks? Number 17, how could a single punctuation mark hide an entire page? On the surface, the document is a typed business letter. It's on the letterhead of a Portuguese import-export company. The text discusses shipping manifests for cork and sardines. It's dated 1943. The language is dry, the content mundane. An enemy censor would have scanned it, maybe checked for secret writing with a chemical agent, found nothing, and stamped it for approval. The censor would have missed the real message entirely, because the real message wasn't between the lines. It was inside one of them. Specifically, it was hidden in the period at the end of the third paragraph. That tiny dot was not a speck of ink. It was a photograph. This was the age of the microdot, a technology that seemed like something out of science fiction. The German intelligence was the first to develop it, but the Allies, particularly the OSS under William Donovan, quickly caught on and improved it. The process, as detailed in declassified OSS technical manuals, was a marvel of photographic reduction. An agent would take a full-page document, a technical schematic, a list of enemy agents, a detailed map, and photograph it using a special camera. Through a series of lenses, the image was shrunk down to a microscopic size, often less than a millimeter in diameter. This tiny negative was then clipped and could be glued over a period, or the dot of an I in an otherwise innocent letter. It could be hidden under a postage stamp or embedded in the binding of a book. The recipient would need a microscope to read the message. They would use a pair of fine-point tweezers to lift the microdot from the page and place it on a slide. Once magnified, the full, detailed document would appear as clear as the original. This technology was a game-changer for espionage. It allowed for the transmission of vast amounts of high-quality data. An agent no longer had to memorize complex information or rely on clumsy codes. They could send an entire blueprint. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, was famously astounded by the technology when it was first demonstrated to him. He called it the enemy's masterpiece of espionage. The FBI's own labs worked hard to find ways to detect microdots, leading to a new level of scrutiny for all international mail. Censors began examining letters under magnification, looking for any punctuation that seemed too glossy or slightly raised. The business letter from Lisbon is a perfect example of this deadly game. Lisbon was a hotbed of spies during the war, a neutral city where both sides operated in the open. A letter like this could have been carrying anything. It might have been a report from a double agent revealing the entire enemy spy network in the city. It could have been the technical specifications of a new radar system stolen by a sympathetic engineer. The text about sardines and cork was the perfect cover, a cloak of boring commerce to hide a secret of immense military importance. And yet, the very nature of this technology leaves us with haunting unknowns. How many microdots were never found, simply thrown away with the letters they were attached to? What if a dot fell off in transit, leaving a priceless piece of intelligence lost forever on a mailroom floor? And could an agent, knowing they were about to be captured, swallow the letter, hoping the tiny secret hidden in a single dot would remain undiscovered? Number 16. What were the ingredients for a suicide pill? This document is not a letter or a map, it's a chemical formula. Typed on a stark, official-looking memo from a government research division, it lists precise quantities of potassium cyanide, along with instructions for its encapsulation. This was the recipe for the L pill, the lethal pill given to certain spies and airmen operating in high-risk environments. The document is cold and clinical. It discusses dosage, speed of action, and methods of concealment. The goal was to create a pill that could be easily hidden but was fast-acting and absolutely foolproof. The research, much of which was conducted by both the British SOE and the American OSS, was methodical. They needed to ensure that a captured agent would have time to use the pill, but that death would be nearly instantaneous, preventing them from revealing secrets under torture. As agents were often given the pill concealed in an everyday object. It might be hidden in the button of a coat, the stem of a pair of glasses, or a fake tooth. The idea was that they should always have it within reach. The existence of this pill was a grim acknowledgement of the stakes of the secret war. Capture did not just mean imprisonment, it often meant interrogation by organizations like the Gestapo, where extreme methods were the norm. The pill was presented as a last resort, an escape. The decision to carry it was a heavy psychological burden. As described in the memoirs of former agents, like those collected in the book The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare by Giles Milton, the pill was a constant, tangible reminder of the danger they were in. It was a promise of a quick death, which in some circumstances was preferable to the alternative. Some agents refused to take it, believing it made one more likely to give up. Others saw it as an essential piece of their kit, as important as their radio or their forged papers. The memo detailing the pill's formula represents the dark side of the scientific innovation that characterized the war. While some labs were developing penicillin and radar, others were perfecting methods of suicide. It was a pragmatic, if brutal, calculation. The life of one agent was weighed against the secrets they held. If those secrets could compromise an entire network or a major military operation, then the agent's death was considered a necessary sacrifice. The document itself is just chemistry and logistics, but it represents a profound moral and ethical dilemma. It is a government-sanctioned recipe for self-destruction, created for the sole purpose of protecting information. It turns the human agent into a living repository of secrets, whose body must be destroyed to prevent those secrets from falling into the wrong hands. This cold piece of paper leaves behind some of the most difficult questions. Who was the scientist who had to test these formulas, and how did they live with that work? How many agents successfully used the pill, and how many were captured before they had the chance? And what does it say about the nature of the war, that the same governments working to save lives on the battlefield were also meticulously designing ways for their own people to kill themselves? Number 15. Why did a spy need an expense report for a brothel? The document looks almost comically bureaucratic. It's an expense reimbursement form submitted by an operative to his handler. It lists items line by line: train ticket 20 francs, meal with informant 15 francs, lodging 10 francs. Then there's a line that stands out: entertainment of foreign official 75 francs. A handwritten note in the margin clarifies the expense: La Fleur Rouge. This was the name of a known brothel. This wasn't an agent trying to cheat on his expenses. This was part of the job. Espionage is not always about daring raids and secret codes. Often it's about people. It's about gaining trust, exploiting weaknesses, and extracting information through conversation. And a great deal of that happened in bars, restaurants, and, yes, brothels. This expense report is a sanitized, bureaucratic record of the messy reality of human intelligence. During the war, neutral cities like Lisbon and Istanbul, and even occupied cities like Paris, were teeming with diplomats, military attaches, businessmen, and spies. They all mingled in a shadowy world of shifting alliances, like an allied agent operating under a cover identity needed to get close to a target, perhaps a mid-level bureaucrat from an enemy embassy who had access to shipping schedules. The best way to do that might be to strike up a conversation over drinks. The agent would have to play a role, perhaps as a corrupt businessman or a fellow sympathizer. The goal was to make the target comfortable, to ply them with alcohol, and to listen. People talk when they drink. They boast, they complain, and they let slip details they shouldn't. The 75 francs spent at La Fleur Rouge might have produced a single crucial piece of information: the name of a U-boat captain, the departure date of a convoy, or a rumor about a new weapon. In his book, A Man Called Intrepid, William Stevenson, the head of British Security Coordination, emphasizes that much of the war was won through this kind of painstaking, unglamorous intelligence gathering. The expense report shows the administrative backbone of this secret world. Every franc had to be accounted for. The agent in the field was part of a larger organization, and that organization ran on paperwork. The handler who approved this expense would have understood its tactical value. They would have weighed the cost against the potential intelligence gain. 75 francs was a small price to pay for information that could save a convoy of ships and hundreds of lives. This piece of paper demystifies the world of espionage. It shows that spies were not mythical figures, they were employees with budgets and bosses. They had to justify their spending, even when that spending involved the morally ambiguous corners of society. The report is a link between the sordid reality of the field and the clean, orderly world of headquarters. It translates a night of deception and manipulation into a simple line item on a balance sheet, but the questions it raises are far from simple. How did handlers verify such expenses, and what was to stop an agent from padding their report? What was the psychological effect on agents who had to live these double lives, feigning friendship and intimacy for the sake of information? And what became of the foreign official, the target of this operation, who may have betrayed his country for a night of pleasure, completely unaware that his every word was being recorded and analyzed? Number 14, what was the real purpose of a pencil detonator? The document is a technical drawing, a blueprint. It's rendered in precise, clean lines with measurements noted down to the millimeter. It looks like the design for a fountain pen or a mechanical pencil. It has a body, a cap, and a clip to attach it to a pocket. But the labels tell a different story. They don't say ink reservoir or lead holder. They say striker, spring, percussion cap, and delay fuse. This was the schematic for a time pencil detonator. It was a masterpiece of lethal engineering designed by the brilliant and often eccentric minds at places like Britain's MD1, nicknamed Churchill's Toy Shop. The purpose of this device was sabotage. It was a timer, no bigger than a pencil, that could be used to set off an explosive charge. The operation was ingeniously simple. An agent would receive the pencil with a thin copper wire holding back a spring-loaded striker. To arm the device, the agent would crush the body of the pencil. This would break a glass vial of acid inside. The acid would then begin to eat away at the copper wire. The thickness of the wire determined the delay. A thin wire might give you a 10-minute delay. A thicker one could provide a delay of several hours. Once the acid ate through the wire, the striker would be released, hitting a percussion cap and igniting the fuse, which in turn would detonate the main explosive charge. This document, the blueprint, represents a crucial part of the Allied strategy irregular warfare. The goal was to disrupt the enemy's war machine from within. Resistance fighters and SOE agents were not meant to engage armies. They were meant to blow up bridges, derail trains, and destroy factories. The pencil detonator was the perfect tool for this. It was small, easily concealed, and looked completely innocent. An agent could walk into a factory with a few of these in their pocket, attach them to charges of plastic explosive placed on key machinery, and be miles away before the explosions occurred. The book The Baker Street Irregulars by Jonathan Petropoulos details how these kinds of devices were part of a complete system of sabotage provided to resistance groups. The Allies would airdrop canisters filled with explosives, guns, and these clever detonators. The blueprint for the pencil was more than just a design, it was a transfer of power. It gave a small group of determined individuals the ability to inflict massive damage. The drawing itself is a paradox. It is an instrument of chaos and destruction, yet it is presented with the sterile precision of an engineering diagram. There is no hint of the violence it will unleash. It is pure function. Every line and measurement is focused on a single purpose to ensure that at a specific moment, a chemical reaction will trigger a physical one, turning a quiet factory into a heap of twisted metal. And this precise document leaves us with some explosive questions. How many of these devices failed, either going off too early or not at all? And what were the consequences for the agents who used them? Who were the anonymous engineers who designed these tools of death, and did they ever see the results of their work? And how many times did a security guard pat down a resistance fighter, feel the pencils in their pocket, and simply let them pass, never knowing how close they came to uncovering a plot? Or number 13, how did a radio signal become a poem? The document is a single sheet of paper from a codebook. It is filled with lines of what appear to be poetry. The stanzas are short, memorable, and often nonsensical. One might read "The lazy fox jumps high," another "The sea is green today." These were not literary creations, they were security checks, an essential part of the life or death communication between a clandestine radio operator in the field and their handlers back in London. An agent operating a radio in occupied territory was in extreme danger. The enemy had sophisticated direction, finding teams that could hunt down the source of a radio signal. Transmissions had to be short, precise, and secure. But there was another, more insidious danger. What if the agent was captured and the enemy forced them to operate the radio? They could then transmit false information, or worse, use the radio to lure other agents into a trap. This is where the poem came in. It was the agent's bluff check or true check. Leo Marx, the brilliant young head of codes and ciphers for the SOE, realized that the standard security checks were too rigid and easily compromised. He revolutionized the system, as he recounts in his memoir, Between Silk and Cyanide. He believed that a code should be personal and memorable. So he began writing original poems for agents to use. The system worked like this: every message an agent sent had to include their prearranged security check. It might be the second line of their personal poem, but they also had a bluff check. A second line they were to use only if they had been captured and were operating under duress. For example, the agent's true check might be, "The lazy fox jumps high." If London received a message with that line, they knew the agent was safe. But if they received a message with the bluff check, "The sea is green today," they would know the agent was captured. They would continue to communicate, pretending everything was normal, but they would feed the enemy false information and use the opportunity to try and understand the situation, perhaps even attempting a rescue. This single page from a codebook, filled with strange poetry, was a lifeline. It was an intensely personal connection between the agent and their handler. Leo Marx often tailored the poems to the agents themselves. He knew that if the poem was meaningful to them, they would be less likely to forget it under stress. He moved away from famous poems which the enemy might also know, and created a library of unique original verses for the secret war. The document is a strange fusion of art and espionage. It is literature used as a weapon. The poetic lines are a thin veil of humanity over a brutal reality. They speak of foxes and seas, but their true meaning is about safety, capture, and betrayal. A single word out of place could mean the difference between life and death. The lingering questions are haunting. How many agents forgot their bluff check under the stress of torture and transmitted their true check, leading their handlers to believe they were safe? What was the emotional toll on the code masters in London when they received a bluff check and knew with certainty that an agent they had trained and befriended was now in the hands of the enemy? And are there any of these original secret poems that have never been declassified, their true meaning lost to time? Number 12, why was a list of train arrivals a state secret? The document is a timetable. It looks like something you would find posted in any train station in Europe. It lists towns, arrival times, departure times, and track numbers. It is a document of public information, of mundane civilian life. But this particular copy has small, handwritten pencil marks next to certain entries. A tiny X, a check mark, a small circle. This was not a traveler's schedule. It was an intelligence report of the highest importance. In a war of movement, the railways were the arteries of the military. They carried troops to the front, tanks from the factories, and supplies to the garrisons. Controlling the railways was essential to controlling the battlefield. And to control them, or at least disrupt them, the Allies needed to know exactly what was moving where and when. This document was likely produced by a resistance network. The information would have been gathered by dozens of ordinary people. A railway worker in Amiens would note the number of flat cars carrying tanks on the 4:15 train. A station master in Lyon would report that the 11 train, usually a passenger service, had been commandeered by the military and was filled with soldiers. A farmer, whose land overlooked a key junction, would keep a log of every train that passed. These small scraps of information would be passed up a chain of contacts, from the farmer to the local baker, from the baker to a regional organizer, until they reached someone with a radio who could transmit the collated data to London. The timetable, with its cryptic pencil marks, was the master document where all this raw data was synthesized. The X might mean a troop train, the circle could signify an ammunition shipment, the check mark might mean the train was running on a special, unscheduled timetable. This kind of intelligence was crucial for several reasons. First, it allowed Allied air forces to target their attacks with incredible precision. Knowing a specific train carrying vital supplies would be on a specific bridge at a specific time allowed for a devastatingly effective bombing run. Second, it provided a clear picture of the enemy's strategic movements. A sudden increase in troop trains heading east was a sure sign that a major offensive was being planned on the Eastern Front. This information, detailed in studies of the French resistance like SOE in France by M.R.D. Foote, was a cornerstone of Allied strategic planning. The document is a testament to the power of collective, passive resistance. The people who gathered this information were not soldiers. They were train conductors, signalmen, and ordinary citizens who risked their lives to make a small pencil mark on a piece of paper. They were nodes in a vast human information network. Their bravery was quiet, methodical, and incredibly effective. The timetable, a symbol of order and predictability, was turned into a weapon of disruption and chaos. But what shadows fall across this simple document? How many of the people who made these observations were caught and executed? What happened when a piece of information was wrong, leading Allied bombers to attack a civilian train by mistake? And how did the resistance networks protect their master timetables from discovery, knowing that such a simple-looking document held the key to their entire intelligence operation? Number 11. What was the identity of the man who never was? The documents in this file are not about a real person. They are about a ghost, a carefully constructed fiction. There is a birth certificate for a man named Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. There are love letters from his fiancée, Pam. There is a St. Christopher's medal, a ticket stub from a London theater, and an angry letter from his bank manager about an overdraft. And there is an official-looking briefcase containing what appear to be top-secret plans for an Allied invasion. None of it was real. Major Martin did not exist. These documents were the props for one of the most audacious deception campaigns of the entire war, Operation Mincemeat. The story, famously recounted in the book The Man Who Never Was by Ewan Montagu, the intelligence officer who masterminded the plan, was worthy of a Hollywood film. The strategic problem was this: in 1943, the Allies were planning to invade Sicily, but Sicily was the obvious target, and it would be heavily defended. They needed to convince the German high command that the invasion was aimed elsewhere, specifically at Greece and Sardinia. They needed the enemy to move their troops away from Sicily. To do this, they decided to plant false documents on them. But how? The plan was as ghoulish as it was brilliant. They obtained the body of a deceased man, a tramp who had died from ingesting poison. They created a complete backstory for him, transforming him into Major William Martin. They dressed him in a uniform, filled his pockets with the mundane trinkets of a real life, and chained a briefcase containing the false invasion plans to his wrist. Then, a British submarine deposited the body off the coast of Spain, a country that was officially neutral but teeming with enemy agents. They made it look like he was the victim of a plane crash. The documents were the heart of the operation. Every single one was meticulously crafted to be convincing. The love letters were written to create a believable personality. The bank overdraft letter was a touch of genius. It made Major Martin seem real, flawed, and human. The secret letters in the briefcase, written between two Allied generals, were carefully worded to be just believable enough. They hinted at a massive invasion of Greece with a feint toward Sicily. The Spanish authorities found the body. The briefcase and its contents were, as hoped, passed along to German intelligence. In Berlin, the documents were analyzed with extreme care. They checked the paper, the ink, the official stamps. They found them to be authentic. The ruse worked. The German regime, convinced by the authenticity of Major Martin's papers, moved entire divisions of troops, including panzer divisions, from Sicily to Greece. When the Allies finally invaded Sicily, they met with far less resistance than expected. The operation saved thousands of lives. The file containing the props for Major Martin is a masterclass in the art of deception. It shows that the most powerful weapon in a spy's arsenal can be a well-told lie. The documents did not hide a secret. They were the secret, a fiction so detailed and compelling that it changed the course of a major campaign. But the story of this phantom major leaves us with chilling questions. Who was the real man whose body was used, and was any thought given to the ethics of using him in this way? What if a single detail in the forged documents had been wrong, tipping off the enemy that it was all a trick? And how many other men who never were created during the war, their fictional lives and deaths serving a secret purpose we still know nothing about? Number 10. How do you write a manual on how to be a spy? The document is a small, pocket-sized booklet. The cover is plain, with no identifying marks. Inside, the text is dense and direct. It is a field manual, but it doesn't teach you how to clean a rifle or apply a tourniquet. It teaches you how to be a spy. So it is a condensed course in the arts of sabotage, propaganda, and clandestine operations. These manuals were produced by organizations like the SOE and the OSS for the agents they were sending behind enemy lines. They were often printed on edible paper so an agent could swallow them if they were about to be captured. The content was a pragmatic and often brutal guide to survival and disruption. One section might detail the most effective way to derail a train, showing the precise point on a track to place an explosive charge. Another would explain how to start a rumor that would damage enemy morale. The language is simple and direct, as seen in surviving copies held in archives. There are no frills. For example, a section on simple sabotage would offer tips for ordinary citizens living under occupation. It would suggest things like working slowly, always using the wrong tool for the job, creating bureaucratic bottlenecks by, losing paperwork and giving wrong directions to enemy soldiers. It was a guide to being a thorn in the side of the occupation, a way to fight back without firing a shot. Other sections were more specialized. There were instructions on how to use a clandestine radio, how to set up a dead drop for passing information, and how to detect if you were being followed. It even offered advice on creating a cover story and how to behave during an interrogation. The manual was a distillation of the hard-won experience of a new kind of warfare. The authors of these booklets were often veteran agents or intelligence officers who knew what worked and, more importantly, what got you killed. This document represents the professionalization of espionage. Spying was no longer just an amateur game of gentlemen. It was a craft with skills and techniques that could be taught and learned. The manual was a textbook for the School of Secret Warfare. It was a tool designed to turn a civilian, a teacher, a lawyer, a shopkeeper, into an effective agent of chaos in a matter of weeks. The existence of such a manual is a window into the mindset of the Allied High Command. They understood that the war would not be won by armies alone. They needed to mobilize a secret army of saboteurs and propagandists. The manual was the doctrine for this secret army. It was a radical document empowering individuals to take direct action against a powerful military state. But this textbook for subversion raises some profound questions. How many of the techniques described in the manual were developed through trial and error? And how many agents died in those early experiments? What happened when one of these manuals fell into enemy hands, providing them with a complete playbook of Allied tactics? And how did the agents, ordinary people before the war, reconcile the cold, calculated instructions for sabotage and deception with their own moral compass? Number 9, what did an analyst see in a leader's handwriting? The document is a psychological profile. It is a typed report, several pages long, compiled by an intelligence analyst. The subject of the report is the leader of the opposing regime, but this is not a standard military assessment of his strategies or resources. It is an analysis of his mind. It delves into his childhood, his relationships, his neuroses, and his motivations. And one of an analyst's key sources was handwriting. A memo attached to the back of the profile shows a sample of the leader's signature and a few lines of his script with detailed notes in the margins. The notes point out the aggressive downward slant of the letters, the heavy pressure of the pen, the erratic spacing. This was a science of graphology, the analysis of handwriting to determine personality traits. During the war, both sides invested heavily in psychological warfare. They wanted to understand not just the enemy's military capabilities, but also their psychological vulnerabilities. The OSS, in particular, recruited a number of leading psychologists and psychiatrists to its research and analysis branch. Their job was to create profiles of key enemy leaders. A famous example is the report on the German leader compiled by psychoanalyst Walter C. Langer for the OSS in 1943. These analysts were like criminal profilers trying to predict the subject's next move by understanding how he thought. They scoured every available piece of information, his speeches, his medical records, interviews with people who knew him, and yes, his handwriting. The graphologists on the team would argue that the way a person formed their letters was an unconscious expression of their inner self. A heavy pen stroke might indicate aggression. A signature that slants sharply upwards could suggest ambition and optimism, while a downward slant might betray depression or fatigue. The analysis of the leader's handwriting in this document would have been combined with all the other data to build a comprehensive picture. The report might conclude that the leader was prone to fits of rage, that he was deeply insecure, or that he had a messiah complex. This information was not just academic, it had practical applications. It could be used to craft black propaganda, rumors, and radio broadcasts designed to exploit his weaknesses and sow dissent among his followers. It could help interrogators break down captured officials who had been part of his inner circle, and it could help Allied leaders anticipate his reactions to their military moves. If the profile suggested he was a gambler who would always double down when cornered, that was a vital piece of strategic intelligence. This document is a strange and fascinating artifact. It represents an attempt to turn the esoteric and often debated field of psychology into a weapon of war. It is a rational, analytical attempt to understand a deeply irrational subject. The analyst's notes on the leader's handwriting are a glimpse into this process, an effort to find military secrets not in a coded message, but in the very loops and slashes of a man's signature. But this raises some deep and troubling questions. How much of this analysis was accurate, and how much was just educated guesswork or pseudoscience? Did any major strategic decisions hinge on these psychological profiles, and what if the profiles were wrong? And what does it mean when a war becomes so total that even a man's subconscious tics, as revealed in his handwriting, are considered a military target? And number 8, how can you hide a map in a silk handkerchief? The document is not on paper. It is printed on a square of fine, lightweight silk. It is a map. But unlike a paper map, it can be crumpled into a tiny ball and hidden in a fist. It can be sewn into the lining of a jacket. It will not rustle or make noise, and if it gets wet, it will not tear or dissolve. These silk maps were one of the cleverest and most practical innovations of the Secret War. They were primarily produced by MI9, the British agency responsible for escape and evasion. They were given to airmen flying missions over enemy territory and to agents operating behind the lines. The logic was simple. If you were shot down or had to flee, the most important tool you could have was a map. But a paper map was bulky, noisy, and fragile. The solution came from the world of cartography and textiles. The British map-making firm John Waddington Lydd, which was also the UK printer of the board game Monopoly, played a key role. As detailed in historical accounts of MI9's work, they developed a technique for printing highly detailed maps onto silk and other durable, lightweight fabrics like rayon. The ink was formulated so it wouldn't run or smudge. The maps themselves were marvels of information design. They covered large areas of occupied Europe. They showed not just towns and roads, but also railway lines, elevations, and sources of fresh water. Crucially, they were often printed with escape routes and the locations of friendly contacts or neutral borders. An Allied airman, shot down over France, could use his silk map to navigate his way south toward the Pyrenees and the safety of Spain. The methods of concealment were as ingenious as the maps themselves. They could be hidden inside the hollowed-out heel of a boot, tucked into a cigarette packet, or even sealed inside a canned food item. In one of the most famous examples, Waddington's hid silk maps inside special editions of the Monopoly board game that were sent to Allied prisoners of war in camps. The game boards were marked with a tiny red dot to indicate they were a special edition. The box contained not just the map, but also a tiny compass, a file, and real currency mixed in with the Monopoly money. This silk map, now a collector's item, is a document of hope. It was a tool of survival, a tangible link to home for those stranded in hostile territory. It represents a different side of the intelligence war, not the aggressive work of sabotage, but the defensive work of helping one's own people get back safely. It was a product of immense care and ingenuity, all focused on the survival of the individual, and yet it is a document that carries its own set of grim questions. How many airmen or agents were caught and killed because they were found with one of these maps? What was the fate of those who followed the map only to walk into a trap set by a double agent or a collaborator? And how many of these silk lifelines are still out there, buried with the remains of the men who carried them, their silent promise of escape unfulfilled? Number 7. Who was on the list of local collaborators? The document is a simple list of names. Next to each name is an address and a profession: a baker, a police chief, a mayor, a school teacher. At the top of the page, a single handwritten word: contacts, but a small coded symbol next to the title changes its meaning entirely. The symbol means hostile. This was not a list of friends, it was a list of enemies. This document is a blacklist, compiled by a local resistance cell. It is a raw piece of human intelligence, gathered at great risk. In every occupied town and village, there were those who collaborated with the occupying forces. Some did it for ideological reasons, others did it for money, for power, or simply to survive. They were the eyes and ears of the enemy within the community. They informed on their neighbors, they identified resistance members, and they enforced the occupiers' rules. For a resistance network or an allied agent to operate safely, they had to know who these people were. This list was their guide. It was a directory of who to avoid, who to watch, and in some cases, who to target. The information would have been gathered painstakingly. A quiet conversation here, an overheard remark there. It was a mosaic of gossip, observation, and betrayal. The baker on the list might be giving extra bread to the local garrison in exchange for favors. The police chief could be actively helping the secret police round up suspects. This document is one of the most dangerous imaginable. If it were to fall into the wrong hands, it would be a death sentence for everyone who helped compile it, and it would expose the entire resistance network in that area. For this reason, such lists were often written in code or with invisible ink. Sometimes they weren't written down at all, but were committed to memory. A written copy like this would have been hidden with extreme care, perhaps in a secret compartment or buried in a field. This list represents the civil war that raged within the larger war. It was a conflict that pitted neighbor against neighbor. The lines were not always clear. Was the woman who had a relationship with an enemy officer a collaborator, or was she just a young woman in love? Was the factory owner who produced goods for the war machine a traitor, or was he trying to keep his workers employed? The list makes no such distinctions. It is a blunt instrument: name, address, profession. When the occupation ended, lists like this one often became the basis for acts of revenge. Collaborators were publicly shamed, their property was confiscated, and some were executed without trial. The list, created as a tool for survival during the war, became a tool for justice or vengeance after it. As documented in historical accounts of the liberation of France and other countries, this period was marked by a wave of violent score settling. And this simple list of names leaves behind a legacy of profound and uncomfortable questions. How many people were put on these lists unfairly, the victims of personal grudges or false rumors? What happened to the people on the list after the war, and did they ever face a formal trial for their actions? And what does such a document say about a community that has been torn apart, forced to identify the traitors living among them? Number 6. What was the last message from a lost agent? The document is a transcription of a radio message. It is short, just a handful of coded groups of letters. The final group is incomplete. The message cuts off mid-transmission. This is the last thing anyone ever heard from an agent with the codename Cicero. This piece of paper is a ghost. It is the final fading signal from an operative deep in enemy territory. The radio operator in the listening station in England would have been straining to hear the faint Morse code signal through the static. They would have written down each letter group as it came in. J, Y, K, L, P, F, G, H, T, Z, then silence. The first job of the codebreakers at the receiving end would be to decipher the message. Using the agent's one-time pad, a set of unique randomly generated keys used for a single message only, they would subtract the key from the coded text to reveal the original letters. The one-time pad system, when used correctly, was mathematically unbreakable. The first part of Cicero's message might translate to something urgent: compromised, station surrounded, destroying, and then nothing. This document is a snapshot of a moment of extreme crisis. The agent Cicero knew they were about to be captured. Their priority was not to escape. It was to send one last message and then to destroy their equipment and codes so they wouldn't fall into enemy hands. The incomplete transmission tells a dramatic story. The agent was probably transmitting while the enemy was breaking down the door to their attic hideout. They were caught in the act. The silence that followed was absolute. For the handlers back in London, this document was the end of the story. There would be no more messages from Cicero. They would be listed as missing, presumed captured, or killed. The network they were a part of would be considered compromised. Other agents in the area would have to be warned. Their own codes and procedures changed immediately. This transcript is a monument to the immense bravery and sacrifice of these clandestine operators. They worked alone, isolated, and under constant stress. Their only link to their home and their mission was the fragile radio signal. When that signal went silent, they were truly gone. The document is a cold, bureaucratic record of a human tragedy. The coded letters are the last words of a person facing certain death. Their final act, a professional duty to their service. The story of the lost agent is a recurring theme in the history of organizations like the SOE. Many of its agents, particularly in places like the Netherlands, were caught in brutal counterintelligence traps. In the infamous England spiel, the German counter-espionage services captured an SOE agent and used his radio to fool London for almost 2 years, leading to the capture and execution of over 50 more agents. This short, garbled message leaves behind the most painful questions of all. Who was Cicero, really? What was their name, their life story before they became a code name? Did they die in the raid, or did they face interrogation and execution? And did the incomplete piece of intelligence they were trying to send, the part that was lost to the static, contain a warning that could have saved others? Number 5. What did a bar of soap have to do with sabotage? The document is a page from a supply catalog, but this is no ordinary catalog. It was produced by the R&D branch of the OSS. The page displays what looks like a normal bar of soap. It has a brand name, La Balle, and some French writing on the wrapper. The description next to it, however, reveals its true nature. It is not soap. It is an incendiary device. This was part of the vast arsenal of disguised ordnance developed for agents and resistance groups. The idea, as championed by OSS Chief William Donovan, was to create weapons and tools that could be carried and planted without arousing suspicion. A bar of soap like this could be left in a vehicle, a supply depot, or an office. It contained a chemical mixture that, when activated, would burn with intense heat, starting a fire that would be difficult to extinguish. The catalog page is a testament to the dark creativity of the wartime scientists. They were masters of camouflage. They took the most mundane objects of daily life and turned them into instruments of destruction. Other pages in the same catalog, some of which are described in the book OSS Special Weapons and Equipment by H. Keith Melton, might have shown other items. A fountain pen that fired a single .22 caliber bullet. A tube of toothpaste that was actually a plastic explosive. A dead rat filled with explosives to be left in a factory's coal pile. The soap was a particularly clever device. It could be carried openly. If an agent were stopped and searched, it would likely be overlooked. They could walk into a guarded facility, leave the bar of soap in a sensitive area, like a room full of documents or next to a fuel drum, and walk out. The activation mechanism was often a simple time delay fuse, similar to the pencil detonator, allowing the agent to be long gone before the fire started. This document shows a different aspect of the secret war economic warfare. The goal of these small acts of sabotage was to create 1,000 tiny cuts. One fire might not seem like much, but hundreds of them across occupied Europe could cause significant damage to the enemy's industrial capacity and logistical network. It was a way to disrupt the war machine from the inside, using minimal resources for maximum effect. The catalog page itself is presented in a very matter-of-fact way. It is a product description. It lists the device's weight, its dimensions, and its incendiary properties. There is no mention of the chaos it is designed to create. It is the sanitized technical face of sabotage. It is a recipe for arson, presented as a mail-order item for spies, but this simple product listing raises some fiery questions. How effective were these devices in reality? Did they work as advertised, or were they prone to failure? Was an agent ever caught because their soap started to leak or malfunction at the wrong time? And who was the anonymous genius who first thought of turning a common toiletry item into a weapon of war? Number 4. Why was a forged passport the ultimate weapon? The document is a passport. It has a photograph of a young man, a name, a date of birth, and a profession: traveling salesman. It has all the right stamps, the right watermarks, the right type of paper. It looks completely authentic. But it is a total fabrication. The man is not a salesman. He is an allied agent. The name is an alias. And the passport was created in a secret workshop in England. This forged document was one of the most important tools in an agent's kit. In a continent crisscrossed by checkpoints and controlled by a suspicious security apparatus, identity was everything. Without the right papers, you couldn't travel, you couldn't rent a room, you couldn't even buy a loaf of bread without attracting unwanted attention. The forged passport was the key that unlocked a hostile world, allowing an agent to move and operate. Creating these documents was an art form. The SOE and OSS had entire departments dedicated to forgery. These were not just printers, they were master craftsmen. They had to replicate the exact paper stock used by different countries, the specific inks, the intricate designs of official stamps. They had to age the documents to make them look used. They would distress the paper, add fake coffee stains, and even practice the signatures of real officials until they were perfect. The process is detailed in accounts from former SOE and OSS operatives. An agent about to be sent into France would need a complete new identity or legend. The forgers would provide everything: an identity card, a work permit, ration coupons, and the all-important passport or travel document. The photograph had to be just right, not a formal portrait, but a candid-looking snap that matched the supposed profession. Every detail had to be perfect because a single mistake, the wrong kind of staple, a slightly incorrect font could be fatal. This passport represents the foundation of all clandestine work, the cover story. The agent had to become the person in the photograph. They had to know their fake biography inside and out, their supposed hometown, their family, their work history. The passport was the physical manifestation of this new identity. It was both a shield and a weapon. It allowed the agent to pass through checkpoints, but it was also a constant source of anxiety. Every time it was presented to a guard, there was the risk of discovery. This document is a masterpiece of deception. It is a lie, but a lie so well crafted that it could pass for the truth. It is a physical object that represents a completely fictional person. In the hands of a skilled agent, this small booklet was more powerful than a gun. It allowed them to get close to their targets, to plant explosives, to gather intelligence, all while hiding in plain sight. The existence of this world of high-stakes forgery leaves us with some critical questions. Who were the master forgers, the anonymous artists whose work was so vital to the war effort? What was the most common mistake that led to a forged document being discovered, and what was the psychological toll on an agent of living under a false name, carrying a passport that was both their greatest asset and their most dangerous liability? Number 3, what did a single word in a coded message really mean? The document is a deciphered message, an intercept. It was originally a string of meaningless letters transmitted by an enemy radio operator. But after days of work by the brilliant minds at Bletchley Park, the British Code-Breaking Center, it has been rendered into plain text. The message is a logistical report, but there is one word that stands out, a code name that the analysts have never seen before. This single, unknown word could be the key to a major secret. This was the daily reality for the thousands of men and women who worked on breaking the German Enigma and Lorenz ciphers. Their work, which was kept secret for decades after the war and is now famously documented in books like The Code Breakers by David Kahn, was arguably one of the most significant contributions to the Allied victory. The process was a colossal intellectual effort. The enemy's cipher machines were incredibly complex, capable of scrambling messages into billions of possible combinations. The codebreakers at Bletchley Park had to devise complex mathematical and mechanical methods, including the famous bomb machine developed by Alan Turing and his colleagues, to find the daily settings for the machines. Once they had the settings, they could begin to read the enemy's secret communications, but deciphering the message was only the first step. The next was to understand it. The enemy used a vast and ever-changing vocabulary of codenames and jargon. A message might refer to the movement of, like 404 to a place codenamed Oak Tree. The intelligence analysts had to figure out what Unit 404 was. Was it an infantry division, a U-boat flotilla? The analysts would cross-reference it with every other message they had intercepted. They would look for patterns. Does the word appear in messages related to the Air Force? Does it show up in communications from a specific region? It was a massive work of data analysis performed with paper, pencils, and human ingenuity. The discovery of the meaning of a single codename could have huge consequences. For example, when the codebreakers figured out that a certain codename referred to a specific type of tank, they could track its production and deployment, giving Allied generals a crucial advantage. When they learned the location of a U-boat refueling point, they could direct the Royal Navy to intercept them. This deciphered message is a testament to the quiet intellectual heroism of the codebreakers. They were not spies in the field, but they were fighting on a critical front of the secret war. Their work was tedious, repetitive, and mentally exhausting, but every word they uncovered, every codename they identified, provided a piece of the puzzle that helped save lives and shorten the war. The single mysterious word on this page is a symbol of their constant struggle to turn noise into information and information into victory. And the questions that remain are vast. How many critical pieces of intelligence were missed because the codebreakers failed to understand the meaning of a single crucial word? What was the pressure like for the analysts who knew that their ability to solve these puzzles had life or death consequences on a daily basis? And how many enemy secrets encoded in messages that were never broken are still out there, waiting in the archives? Number 2, why was a packet of aspirin so dangerous? The document is a memo from a logistics officer at the SOE to one of their scientific research stations. It's a request for a new batch of a very specific item, aspirin, type 4. This sounds like a routine medical supply request. But there was nothing routine about type 4 aspirin. This memo is a request for an assassination weapon. The aspirin tablets were fakes. They were pills made of a potent, fast-acting poison designed to look exactly like the real thing. They were intended for a very specific type of mission, the targeted elimination of a high-ranking enemy official. This document pulls back the curtain on the most ruthless aspect of the secret war. While much of espionage was about gathering information, there was also a darker side. Both the SOE and the OSS had sections dedicated to what was euphemistically called special operations, which included assassination. These were highly controversial missions, often approved at the highest levels of government. The aspirin was a tool for this work. An agent, perhaps working undercover as a clerk or a medic, could gain access to a target. They could then swap the target's real aspirin for the poisoned ones. It was a method that was subtle and, with luck, untraceable. The death would appear to be from natural causes, like a heart attack, avoiding the risk of reprisals or a major investigation. The science behind this was precise. The poison had to be tasteless and odorless. It had to be stable enough to be formed into a pill. And it had to be lethal in a single dose. The scientists in the secret labs were tasked with creating these deadly pharmaceuticals. The memo, with its dry bureaucratic language, requests 200 units, aspirin. Type 4 is a chilling example of how this deadly work was normalized and integrated into the war's administrative machinery. This type of operation was part of the ungentlemanly warfare that the SOE, in particular, was created to wage. The goal was to attack the enemy in unconventional ways, to disrupt their leadership, and to create fear and paranoia within their command structure. A successful assassination could remove a key strategist or a brutal administrator, potentially saving many lives in the long run. But it was a morally complex business. The document is a stark reminder that the war was fought without gloves. The memo is not about healing, it is about killing. The aspirin was not medicine, it was poison. It represents a cold, calculated decision to take a human life for a strategic advantage. It is the point where espionage crosses the line into state-sanctioned murder. This simple memo leaves behind some of the most disturbing questions. Who were the targets of these assassination attempts, and how many were successful? What was the psychological impact on the agents who had to carry out these missions, becoming assassins in the service of their country? And where is the line between a legitimate act of war and a simple murder, especially when the weapon of choice is disguised as a common headache remedy? Number 1. What secret was held in the final blank page? The document is a small notebook. It is the type issued to agents in the field. The first few pages are filled with notes in a tight, precise script. They are observations, names, addresses, all written in a complex personal code. Then, abruptly, the writing stops. The last 20 pages of the notebook are completely blank. This is the most mysterious document of all. It is a story with no ending. The blank pages are not just empty. They are a void. They represent a mission that was cut short, a voice that was silenced. What was the agent planning to write on these pages? What crucial discovery were they about to record when they were captured or killed? The notebook itself is a powerful artifact. It was an agent's brain, their external memory. In a world where you could trust no one, the notebook was the only reliable confidant. The personal code used to write in it was a last line of defense. It was designed to be unbreakable without the key, which was often based on a keyword or phrase known only to the agent. So even if the notebook was captured, the information it contained might remain secure. The transition from the dense, coded notes to the stark, empty pages is jarring. It is a physical representation of a life interrupted. One moment, the agent was active, gathering intelligence, making plans. The next, they were gone. The blank pages are a silent testament to their fate. They are the sound of a radio that has stopped transmitting, the echo of a footstep that suddenly ceases. This notebook could have belonged to any of the thousands of agents who were lost during the war. It might have been the property of an SOE agent in France who was betrayed by an informant. It could have been carried by an OSS operative in Germany who was caught by the secret police. The coded notes might contain the details of a resistance network, the location of a secret weapons facility, or the identity of a high-level traitor within the Allied command. We will never know. The blankness is a challenge. It invites speculation. It forces us to confront the unknown, which is the true essence of the secret war. For every story we know, for every declassified document that reveals a successful operation, there are countless others that ended in failure and silence. The archives are full of these incomplete stories, these fragments of missions that went dark. The final blank page of this agent's notebook is perhaps the most profound document of them all. It contains no hidden ink, no microdot, no secret code. Its secret is its emptiness. It is a memorial to all the information that was lost, all the secrets that were never told, and all the agents who never came home. And so, we are left with the ultimate questions, the ones that can never be answered. What was the final unwritten secret in this notebook, the piece of intelligence that was lost at the moment of the agent's capture? How many other such notebooks are out there? Their coded messages still unread, their blank pages still waiting for a story that will never be told. And how much of the true history of the Secret War is not in the documents we can read, but in the silence of the ones that were never finished.